achieved.
Hi folks, Scott Johnson here for Kamikaze Overdrive MMA predictions. I've decided to do a post-fight podcast for UFC 162. Normally I type these up, or I have Dylan Collins or Josh Harper type them up for me and give me their views on the fights. But considering the magnitude of the main event of UFC 162 with Anderson Silva losing his title to Chris Weidman, I thought I'd verbalize my opinion for those of you willing to take a few minutes and listen. I'll try and keep it a little bit briefer than under the 20-minute mark, but let's get to it. Overall, my predictions, I went 7-4. I tried a couple upsets that didn't come through for me, which were a little bit disappointing, but I also hit one major upset and a very close pick'em fight that actually turned into an underdog with the betting odds before the card got finished. Let's take a quick look. Let's start at the bottom. We'll work our way to the top. Mike Pierce, David Mitchell. I had Mike Pierce winning this fight. He did so. He took out David Mitchell in spectacular fashion. TKO, or not spectacular, but impressive. And I think Pierce was overmatched there. I'd like to see him get pushed up finally to a top. He's got 2 stoppages in his last 3 fights. Push him up to a top 15 opponent. We'll see how he fares there. Up next is my first loss tonight. I had Seth Basinski over Brian Melanson. And however you pronounce his name, Melancon, however you say it. Melanson looked good, knocked out Basinski. Basinski just didn't get started, got hit with a couple big shots, and just never got out of the gates and suffered as a result with a late knockout. Melanson, I'd like to see him drop to lightweight and continue on there. Basinski, still a tough guy at welterweight, but certainly it's a big loss. Actually, back-to-back losses now. That sets him back considerably. Edson Barboza taking Rafael Oliveira. Another one of those fights was kind of a mismatch. Edson coming through. I had Edson to win this fight by knockout, and he did. I also had the under, and Barboza was my number 2 confidence pick, Mike Pierce being my number 1. Probably Oliveira is going to get the axe here from the UFC. Barboza taking another step towards the top 10 of the division, but he needs a convincing win over a top-level opponent, and it'd be interesting to see who they match him up with. Maybe a Joe Lozon might be interesting. That would be certainly a credible fight if Barboza could pull off the upset. Either way, Edson moving on and upward, and that's a good thing for Brazilian MMA as far as I'm concerned, the lightweight division. Heavyweights, I had Gonzaga to take out Dave Herman. I took it by submission, but Gonzaga absolutely destroyed Herman in 17 seconds by knockout. Very impressive. First, Dave Herman's he's done. 4 straight losses, all finishes, I believe, yes. And then you figure, he stopped by Struve, Nelson, Nogueira, and now Gonzaga. Plus, you figure the rehab in there. He's getting the gate. He's a talented guy. He's run into some bad luck, some higher level competition. He's not old by any stretch of the imagination. He'll probably work his way back, considering how shallow the UFC heavyweight division is. Gabe Gonzaga, good for him. Solid UFC veteran, one of the 3rd longest serving UFC veterans, next to Czech Congo and Frank Mir. Big win. Usually gets him by submission. Does have some knockouts. That's a nice knockout for him. Gabriel Gonzaga versus Todd Duffy would be a fight I would like to see. We'll see where Duffy's at when he comes back from injury. Gabriel Gonzaga will be an excellent challenge, and winner of that gets a nice little push upwards. Up next, for my first major upset that I was hoping to hit, I had Kazuki Tokudomi to upset Norman Park by decision. Unfortunately, it didn't happen that way. Tokudomi got off to a slow start and was getting hit with some big shots. Park's striking looked on point, much better than I anticipated, and as a result, he got the win with that. Tokudomi's grappling was there. He just couldn't match the striking, and when things are close in the ground, you better get the better of the striking. Norman Park picks up the win. And Tokudomi put on a good fight. I think he deserves another shot in the UFC. He's 1-1. It was an entertaining matchup for the most part. And I think I'd like to see him fight at least one more time. Obviously, Norman Park, Ultimate Fighter winner, 2-0 now. He's sticking around and should fight someone around his level again. Moving on up, Chris Lieben drops a loss to Andrew Craig. I took Craig in this fight by decision. Split decision, which shows one of the officials certainly, or one of the judges, does not understand how mixed martial arts works. He put way too much onus on Lieben's forward pressure, and that's unfortunate because Craig was controlling the action, landing the better shots, doing better in the clinch work, avoiding, who's winning the fight? The guy who's walking forward and getting hit, or the guy who's doing the hitting? And he's backtracking, but that's part of defense, the defensive aspects of the game. If the guy pushes forward, if you can move away from him and still do damage, you're winning the fight. And yet one of the judges screwed up and gave it to Lieben. It would have been a shame had Andrew Craig been robbed. For Lieben, I think his time has come. It's time to move on. He's been there for a long time, but he's a very predictable fighter. I did like the way he tried to mix things up by using his wrestling early. It just didn't work. It's not there. His hands are powerful, but that's about it. And if you can't hit a guy with their power, it doesn't matter how much power you have. It's a non-factor. Andrew Craig impressed me. He's 3-1 now in the wins he's got. Chris Lieben, Kyle Noak and Rafael Natal, and then almost coming back and taking out Ronnie Marks. Impressive for Andrew Craig. I know Chris Camozzi's coming off a loss, but I think Chris Camozzi, Andrew Craig would be a very interesting matchup. I'd like to see those two guys mix it up. I think that would be a very telling fight to see where, Camozzi's fighting Jacare. It was a tough fight for him and a big step up, and I think him versus Craig would be a very interesting bout. So preliminary fights, I went 4-2 on the prelims. Main card I went 3-2 overall. Start off with Cub Swanson, Dennis Seaver. I had Seaver to win this by decision. Of course, the Seaver won the opening round. It was exactly the way I expected to play out. Cub took a big chance. He missed with a big kick. Seaver countered with a takedown. Almost 3 minutes of top control. Won the opening round. But unfortunately, Seaver cutting weight, he started to fade, and he couldn't take advantage of a scramble, and Cub got on top, and that was pretty much spelled the beginning of the end for Dennis. I really like Seaver as a fighter. I wish Cub, on the other hand, would calm down his cockiness a little bit. He just seems to come off as a guy who's slightly disrespectful to me. He seemed like he was looking past Seaver in the fight, and I really thought that was going to cost him. But he got the stoppage in the end. There's no doubt he's an entertaining fighter. He should be very close to getting a title shot. And honestly, I'd like to see a Cub Swanson-Frankie Edgar matchup. And the way I like to see it play out is this. Cub Swanson has a loss to Ricardo Lamas. Cub Swanson versus Frankie Edgar. Winner of that fight fights Ricardo Lamas. Winner of that gets a title shot. Because if Cub gets by Frankie, then he absolutely should get another shot at Ricardo, and then the winner of that gets a title shot. And if Frankie gets by Cub, and then he can get by Ricardo, then give him another title shot against Jose Aldo. He's earned it. But we'll talk about that in a second. Dennis Seaver, I was, Darren Elkins would be an interesting matchup for him. We'll test his takedown defense at this level against a pure wrestler. I was thinking Dennis Seaver, he had won that fight. A great matchup for him, stylistic, or an interesting matchup would have been against Chad Mendez, because you have Seaver, probably the slightly better striker. See how his takedown defense, but again, his cardio seems to be an issue. He looked very gaunt at the weigh-ins, and that clearly takes a lot out of him. And it's unfortunate because I really like to watch him fight. He seems to be slightly too big for 145 and slightly too small for 155. And it shows how times have changed, considering this guy came in as a welterweight to the UFC and now competing as a featherweight. Up next, Mark Munoz was actually an underdog by the time the fight started in the betting odds. I took him to take out Tim Boetsch by decision. He did so. He looked fantastic. In my bet packs, I went in, I moved Munoz into one of my value picks. I said, play Munoz hard, because he looked great at the weigh-ins. We know the struggles he had with weight loss, and I'm very impressed with that. He looked fantastic, absolutely smashed a very tough and physically strong Tim Boetsch, and gorilla rape was the term I used when I was describing it to someone, as Mark Munoz by gorilla rape decision, and that's what it looked like. And hopefully that offends no one, but that's really what it looked like. And he was all over him, just hammering him. Very good wrestling, looks to be in excellent shape. But I said after the weigh-ins, Munoz looked good, and Boetsch looked like he had been knocked over with a strong fart. And I said play Munoz hard. He thumped on Tim Boetsch hard. That's for darn sure. Where's Mark Munoz go from here? Michael Bisping will be an excellent matchup. Alan Belcher would also be an interesting matchup, even though Belcher's coming off a loss. Munoz getting a shot at the title after getting destroyed by Chris Weidman. Probably not in the cards right away. He needs probably 2, maybe 3 more really good, impressive wins. That's the first one, and he needs to work his way up the ladder. And like I said, Alan Belcher, Costa Philippou would be another interesting matchup as well. I believe he's fighting Jacare in the near future, and that Jacare would be a top flight matchup there. Tim Boetsch, out of the top 10 with that loss, not too far out of the top 10. Who am I thinking for Tim Boetsch? Brian Stan would be a solid fight. Who's Paul Harris when he comes back? That might be an interesting matchup as well for Timmy. He seems to have trouble with wrestling, and that's what happened in that fight. First round was close. He just faded, and that's unfortunate. He said it himself, 185 is a tough cut, and it showed up with the way Munoz was able to wear him out. Tim Kennedy, Hodger Gracie. Actually, this would be an interesting matchup. Tim Kennedy, Mark Munoz. Kennedy's not in the title hunt by any stretch of the imagination, but he's coming off a win. I had Hodger Gracie in this upset to pull it off, and I want to talk about the judges in a second, but Tim Kennedy got the job done, even though I had Hodger Gracie. Kennedy Munoz would be an interesting matchup. Let's go with that, actually, for the next one. I was shocked to see 2 30-27s. I thought Gracie won the opening round, dominant positions, controlling his back. Sure, he didn't blow the doors off Tim Kennedy, but I thought he didn't have to win the opening round. Only one judge gave it to him. I thought that was disgusting. Will Gracie stick around? His name might keep him around for one more fight, especially if they go down to Brazil. Unfortunately, it's just he doesn't have the gas at 185. It's a huge cut. He's a huge man to be cutting down to 185 pounds at 6'4", I believe, 6'4", 6'3", somewhere in there. But he can certainly, anybody can grapple and get to the ground, he has an opportunity, but his striking is so rudimentary that it makes it difficult. in a fight. And Tim Kennedy wasn't doing a great job with the striking, and that was the absolute interesting part of this fight, is that Kennedy took it to him with his grappling. I actually expected Kennedy to be more willing to go for the grappling at the beginning and Gracie take advantage of it. Gracie was just too tired, and unfortunately that was the story of this bout. And Tim Kennedy moves up and on. And I said Kennedy-Munoz would be an interesting matchup at middleweight. I can't think off the top of my head who I'd pair Roger Gracie with for moving forward. But either way, not the greatest fight, but Tim Kennedy will take it. Featherweight bout, Frankie Edgar gets a W. The UFC needed Frankie Edgar to get a win. And Charles Oliveira almost spoiled the party. Oliveira looked very good. One judge gave him a round. I thought he looked excellent. He bloodied Frankie up, which is, not shocking. Frankie gets hit. Frankie gets bloodied up in almost every single fight he's in. Doesn't really matter. But Edgar, is he a gatekeeper at 145? No, not really. As I said, he's 2 wins away, I think, from a title shot. Edgar Cub Swanson is the way to go next, I think. Or you could go Edgar at Lamas, but I think Edgar Cub Swanson. And the winner of that faces Ricardo Lamas. Even though it's all about time frame. I don't know what the injuries are, how long these guys are out, because Lamas might not want to sit. Maybe you can match Lamas up with someone and almost have a mini 4-fighter tournament. But I think Edgar deserves, he needs at least 2 good wins before he gets back in there with Aldo or the Korean Zombie. If he wins, then Frankie Edgar gets pushed right to the front, I think. For Charles Oliveira, good for him. Excellent fight. Very impressed. I've always liked this guy. I've had, it's the 7th time I've predicted him. I predicted him to pull off upset in his debut over his second fight against Efrain Escudero. I was very impressed with him, and he did everything. His striking looked on point. He gave Frankie some tense moments with his grappling, and I give him 100% credit. Certainly a guy who has some capabilities. Hatsu Aoki, actually, against Charles Oliveira will be a very interesting matchup. Aoki, a very big name. Both guys very slick on the ground. I'd like to see that fight go on, maybe in Japan, when they go back, or in Brazil if they go down there. Very, very good fight for both men. Main event time, Chris Weidman, Anderson Silva. I took Weidman to win it. I took him by, I believe, decision. I thought he'd do enough with his top game. He was doing it in the first round, but honestly speaking, it looked like he was fading a little bit, and it looked like up until that knockout, Anderson might have been getting in his head. He wasn't shooting for takedowns, and when he was, they were half-hearted. He looked good early, but his mouth was open, and I don't want to take anything away from Chris Weidman, but he won the fight, champion. I picked him, great, and some people, good for you, way to pick him. But at the same time, you look at Anderson Silva. I'm now 3-3 predicting Anderson Silva fights. I predicted Sonnen to beat him both times, and I predicted Yushin Okami to beat him. So it's kind of like even a broken clock is right twice a day, if you will. But still, I felt Weidman had the tools, and I really felt it seemed like the whole UFC felt like Weidman was the man to do it, because they were talking about Silva almost as if he was a great champion, as if he'd lost the title before the fight even took place. The way they were playing it up. But I really liked, I don't know if it was Goldie or Rogan talked about Anderson Silva. They recognized that he needed to fight Weidman now as opposed to a year from now, because that's how good Weidman's getting. He's coming off a year layoff. This was the perfect time to fight him. But interesting to see going forward if Silva does give his head a shake, realize that, we're going to get Anderson Silva money thrown at him, probably a new level of Anderson Silva money thrown at him to set up a rematch, because Uncle Dana knows how important this is to the UFC, because they've lost out on the John Jones and the George St. Pierre super fights. Well, potentially. They still could be very interesting with Anderson. I'm not sure what he wants to do now, but still wants to keep fighting. But I think we're going to see a rematch, and I'm not 100% sure who I'd take, because if Weidman can't take him down consistently for 5 rounds, and Anderson decides, I'm actually going to fight and not act like a clown like he did, I think Anderson has the capabilities of taking Chris Weidman out and taking his title back. I'm curious to see if this motivates him, if he gets the opportunity to sit down with his coaches, his trainers, his family, and they tell him, you don't want to go out like this. You have an opportunity. You had the opportunity to potentially retire as a champion if you got by Chris Weidman and continued to fight and knock off guys. Because who was next? Vitor maybe. He could have used the excuse to avoid him because he's beaten him already once. But to go out like this and lose your belt like this, that's disappointing. Weidman's a champion. Congratulations. I want to talk about Silva for a bit. And Dana White. I was very disappointed with Dana White for defending Anderson Silva's antics. I saw, Silva, sure, it could be tactics to get in the guy's head, but there's a line, and he crossed it as far as I'm concerned when it comes the difference between tactics and playing and clowning around with your opponent and disrespecting the sport and disrespecting the fans. And I'm glad he got clipped and knocked out. But it's unfortunate how the title changed hands. I would have much rather seen Weidman catch him in an exchange and knock him out, not catch him during a showboating gone wrong type scenario. And I look back to Manny Pacquiao when he lost, not to Timothy Bradley, but to Marquez. Was it Marquez? And I look at that, and there's a guy who's a top level, elite level fighter who just got caught and knocked out in a fight. He didn't screw around. His guard, he just got clipped, and it elevated Marquez. And I gained a lot of respect for Pacquiao because he lost. No, I gained. It's not that I gained a lot of respect. I had a lot of respect for him before for his in-ring capabilities, but he lost. Legitimate, it happens. I lost respect for Anderson Silva for the way he went down, and I lost respect for him before. The Damian Maia incident, as much as the Stephen Bonner situation, you don't clown a guy. These guys are athletes. They put in days and hours and days and weeks and months of preparation to get to this fight, and you stand there and make their skills look insignificant. It's one thing to beat a man. It's another thing to humiliate him and to do that to him. And I'm glad Weidman put him in his place. But at the same time, I would have much rather seen the title change hands as the result of a more respectable series of events as far as the former champion, and I love saying that, former champion Anderson Silva is concerned. Now Dana White defended him at the post-fight press conference. That was stupid. He should have come out and said, Anderson made a mistake. Anderson got caught. Anderson learned a lesson. Hopefully every other fighter, whether it be a champion or a guy making his first fight or his 40th fight, sees what one of the greatest of all time did and learns from that and knows that you are never untouchable, as Anderson thought he was, and it could cost him in the long run. Either way, I don't like what Dana White said at the post-fight press conference defending him and making it seem like it was a great fight, because it wasn't a great fight. It was a good first round, a very interesting first round. Second round was garbage until the knockout, which put a smile on my face and everyone else's when I eventually did see it. But outside of that, Chris Weidman probably should face Vitor Belfort next. I would think that would make sense. The other question I have is, does Chael Sonnen make an attempt to come back down to middleweight? Chael's only lost to Anderson Silva at middleweight. If he can make the cut, take a run at it. I think that would be very interesting. Michael Bisping would be an interesting matchup as well if he can get a couple wins together. I think he matches up better with Chris Weidman than he does with Anderson Silva. We'll have to see how that plays out. I don't think, I think that'd be more of a geography-based title shot. Okay, we're going to the UK. Let's get a big-time headliner. Let's get Bisping in there against Weidman for the title. I think Vitor gets the next one. I think Chael should come back down and take a run at it because the division needs good top-level challengers. Jacare is another guy who's coming down the pipe who could be in line, and that would be a very interesting matchup there with Jacare's improving striking and lethal submission capabilities. For Anderson Silva, who wants to fight him next? I don't know. If he doesn't want to fight for the title, no one's lining up to be like, okay, I've got a 4-fight winning streak to fight on the line, and I've built up some momentum, and now I'm going to fight Anderson Silva for no title. I possibly could. Sure, if you win, it's huge and could get you a title shot, but at the same time, it's like if you lose, well, where do you go from there? It's a big loss on your record. I'm thinking he could probably... Maybe going up to light heavyweight would be interesting. I'd actually really like to see him, if he doesn't want to fight for middleweight, go up to light heavyweight and challenge for the light heavyweight title. If he thinks, he doesn't want to fight for middleweight anymore and he's tired, become a challenger. Go after that, see if you can get a couple fights. Anderson Silva against Shogun Rua, Anderson Silva against Dan Henderson, a light heavyweight, would be fights I'd be interested to see. And, going forward, if he elects to retire, good riddance, see you later. If not, if he comes back and takes it a little more serious and actually fights the fight and shows what he's capable of and not just, the idiocy that we saw in the second round that cost him the title, that's what I want to see at Anderson Silva, the effort and the effort of a champion, not a clown. So that's it for me. UFC 162 in the books. UFC on Fox 8. Demetrius Johnson against John Moraga up next. Those two guys are going to go for it. You'll never see Demetrius Johnson pull a clown move like that. He's going to get in there and go. And Moraga's come out of nowhere and put a good run together with some solid victories. He's got a title shot at flyweight. If you're not a believer in the flyweights yet, that's a good fight. Don't miss it. So the bet packs did okay. Kamikaze Overdrive prediction tournament. That will be the final round, a final event for the second round. Some close matchups, so lots to do yet there. I'm going to try and get my the polls up for that event, so make sure you go in and vote. Click on who you think is going to win each fight. As always, thank you very much to all my fans, followers, and listeners, people who are commenting and supporting me, and I greatly appreciate it. Can't think of anything else I need to cover. Boston Bruins lost the Stanley Cup. That was a little bit disappointing. Let's end on that note, and I'll see you. I won't see you, but you'll hear me, and I'll see the things you write. in the near future. Thanks for listening as always. Kamikaze Overdrive MMA predictions.